Hi, welcome to Myers ASMR. In today's story time, we're going to learn about jazz, an introduction to the history and legends behind America's music. Written by Bob Blumenthal. But first, I'm a little bit hungry, so I want to taste a bit of my applesauce and cottage cheese. I actually made this applesauce myself. It's pretty easy to make. Basically, blend some apples. Well, I boiled the apples for a few minutes so they would get soft, so they could easily blend in the blender, and just cut them into like 4 pieces each. Put them in the blender with enough water, not too much water, but just enough water so that the blender could churn. And a little honey and cinnamon. And here you have it. I think I might have added a little turmeric. Yeah, I'm pretty sure I did. That's why it looks so yellow. Hey, gotta keep it healthy, right? You know, my friend goes to the food pantries every week, and sometimes they give you so much stuff, which of course I'm grateful for, but he'll give me a bag of apples, and I'm like, okay, what am I gonna do with this? So, applesauce. So fresh. And no, I did not remove the skin. I love it with the tang of cottage cheese. Cottage cheese is kind of salty next to the sweetness of the apples. It's a nice mixture. Don't knock it. I grew up with this. This was our cheap snack. And this is the only way that I'll eat cottage cheese. Other than that, I don't even know what to do with it. When I grew up, we always had a whole lot of cats in the yard. And sometimes when we were in the kitchen, just unknowingly, messing with the pots on the stove, just kind of scraping stuff out of pots, the cats in the yard would go wild. They would start jumping on the screen door, and they'd be right there, right outside the screen door on the porch, looking up, waiting for somebody to come out. So we pretty much knew whenever we were scraping a pot, like after dinner, we better have some left for them. Cats are great. I'm supposed to be starting my story time, but I love this mixture of cottage cheese with applesauce. Chips are just so freaking good. Okay, well, let's see where we left off. Okay. Ragtime and blues. So this is from chapter 1, which is called Blues and Roots, Jazz Before 1920. And here the author is discussing ragtime and blues. As more sophisticated, spontaneous, even revolutionary styles of African American music arose, minstrel shows helped disseminate them to audiences around the country. Two such styles, which we can consider jazz's siblings rather than its strict chronological precursors, were ragtime and blues. Did you know when Jelly Roll Morton made his invaluable Library of Congress recordings in 1938, he used Joplin's maple leaf rag to illustrate how ragtime had generated and then been superseded by the new jazz approach. Scott Joplin's ragtime compositions for solo piano created a phenomenon at the beginning of the 20th century. Ragtime was initially a Midwestern phenomenon. The style initially became identified with St. Louis, Missouri, where Scott Joplin and other itinerant pianists gained initial fame near the turn of the century, and it quickly turned into a popular fad with the rise of the cakewalk. The music is totally composed with distinct sections, usually of 16 bars, that suggest a classical rondo, but ragtime's defining characteristics is its staggered, ragged, syncopated melodies that place accents on unexpected beats and create a momentum anticipating what we now call swing. Popular entertainers and songwriters, including the composer Irving Berlin, who wrote the hit song Alexander's Ragtime Band in 1911, quickly embraced the dramatic tension in such ragtime classics as Joplin's Maple Leaf Rag of 1899, with the pendulum steadiness of the left hand figures working against the more unpredictable right hand accents. At the same time, ragtime was making an impression on pianists more inclined to depart from the music's written scores and embellish performances with their own spontaneous variations. Pianists Lucky Roberts, Willie the Lion Smith, and James P. Johnson had begun to work their looser and more ornate variations on ragtime into what would be called rent party or stride piano before anything called jazz had formally arrived in New York. And in New Orleans, Tony Jackson, Jelly Roll Morton, and other pianists were playing with the forms, rhythms, and breaks of ragtime in search of a more spontaneous approach. Well, I gotta taste a little more of my snackety snack. Yakety yak, don't talk back. I just love that salty tanginess next to the applesauce. So good. All right, well, let's continue. Now the author discusses the blues, which I love. Both spirituals and ragtime compositions formed essential components in the repertoire of early jazz bands and jazz soloists. Given the secular and informal nature of America, though, it was unlikely that either sacred songs or rigorously notated piano scores could launch a revolutionary musical language. That role fell to the blues, a subject as rich at its core and hazy at its boundaries as jazz itself. Laments about oppressive living and working conditions provided early blues texts, though what we think of as the blues quickly took on more romantic subject matter that encompassed defiance and determination, as well as the sorrow indicated when someone admits to having the blues. Excuse me. The early years of the 20th century saw the spread of what would become the blues' most common and profound structure, a form both compact in its contours and inexhaustible in its implications. The 12-bar AAB blues presents a grid more compact than the sonnet, yet potentially as vast as the epic. An initial 4-bar stanza is first repeated and then resolved. There are basic modulations to the subdominant chord at bar 5 and the dominant chord at bar 9. The flatted 3rd and 7th scale tones in a chord lend a distinctive feeling. Musicologists tell us that even the harmonic characteristics can be traced back to Africa rather than Europe, making the blues one of the purest products of the African American experience. Must know the blues dates back to the work songs of plantation slaves, which carried over to the cries of itinerant street vendors at the turn of the century. Many itinerant and undocumented blues singers disseminated what would become a basic form of jazz and other African American music. Did you know Gertrude Ma Rainey first heard the blues in 1902 when she was 16? 2 years later, she was singing them in a minstrel show and was soon billed as the mother of the blues. W.C. Handy collected and published early blues songs, leaving the true paternity of the style in question. Must know W.C. Handy earned the title Father of the Blues, but the true authorship of some of his songs is debatable. While the earliest blues were performed by itinerant singers who accompanied themselves on guitar or piano, entertainers working in the more commercialized minstrel and vaudeville shows quickly picked up the style. W.C. Handy was a cornetist and band leader who had already performed in minstrel show bands and vocal quartets when, in 1903, he heard a slide guitarist play and sing the Yellow Dog Blues in Tutwiler, Mississippi. This inspired Handy to collect additional examples of the new song form and ultimately to copyright his discoveries as original compositions. The father of the blues. It is beyond dispute, however, that Handy's Memphis Blues, a 1912 reworking of the political campaign song Mr. Crump that he penned 3 years earlier, was the first published blues. 2 years later, St. Louis Blues was an even bigger success and became the epitome of the genre. Dance orchestras were recording Handy's compositions before the original Dixieland Jazz Band made its first record, but it was the ODJB success that provided the opportunity for Handy's Orchestra of Memphis to make its own recordings in 1917, including several blues as well as 2 rags. The stiff results indicate that Handy's primary talent was as a composer, or less charitably, a compiler. New Orleans. All of this music, spirituals, minstrel songs, ragtime, blues, and the rest came together in the incredible cauldron that was early 20th century New Orleans. This port city near the mouth of the Mississippi River, with its distinct French Creole background, had always been more open to the African traditions of slaves than other American urban centers. and shortly after the Civil War, it witnessed a blossoming of music. Did you know the term jazz was first applied to Brown's Dixieland Jazz Band during a Chicago appearance in 1915? The newly freed blacks formed fraternal organizations and other often secret societies reflecting Vodun traditions. These societies featured orchestras that incorporated a variety of music, including the popular marches played by French military bands. When a member of the society died, the orchestra would perform at the funerals and wakes, marching to and from the cemetery and attracting a second line of celebrants that harkened back to burial traditions in Dahomey. These bands were also heard on less solemn occasions, including the picnics and dances that were central to the black community's social life. Must know, the mixed ethnicity Creoles, known as the Creoles of color once a segregation code had been put in place, played a significant part in developing New Orleans music. Creoles of color, representing a mixture of Spanish, French, and African ancestry, the Creoles were a distinct caste in the early years of Reconstruction, clearly treated as inferior to Caucasians, yet holding themselves above the Negroes. Creole families nurtured their European roots and frequently provided their children with training in European music. It was a shock to the Creoles once the white reaction to Reconstruction set in to find that the white majority considered them an undifferentiated part of the colored underclass. Creoles saw blacks as ignorant and unrefined, while black musicians tended to find Creoles technically proficient but lacking in emotional and creative depth. Prejudice was not simply expressed in terms of pure black and pure white. Storyville spreads the message. The white majority was exposed to the music of the black orchestras and the Creole musicians as well, especially after Storyville was established as an officially sanctioned center for gambling parlors, houses of prostitution, and other sporting establishments. In its 20 years of existence, this precursor to today's adult entertainment zones was a hotbed of what would become jazz. Storyville establishments provided the employment that allowed many who otherwise had to subsist on manual labor to become professional musicians, and had much to do with creating the aura of disrepute that was initially attached to jazz, and with enhancing its sexual connotations. Storyville also gave members of the ODJB and other white New Orleans musicians direct exposure to this radical new music. Sorry, I'm just going to take my pen and mark where I need to pick up with the next story time. I'd rather do it now so I don't forget. Well, isn't that a nice piece of American history? You know, the Heritage Fest in New Orleans is coming up. I'm looking forward to it. I'm at the bottom of the bag. That's why they're so small. When I first opened the bag, they were these big chips. I loved it. Well, I think that's it. Well, thanks for watching. Like and subscribe. Catch me in the next video, and may you find lasting happiness. Bye.